Zeynep, you over here? Please. Hello. Good. You there? Yeah. Robert? Lou, over there. No, Jean-François? Jean-François? Jean-François, ici. Thank you very much. So, as we say, exceptional day, exceptional panel, and unfortunately, exceptional short time for this great conversation. We have 25 minutes. So, I apologize already for the bio lovers among you. I will be very quick for the introduction. And by the way, I trust that everybody on this panel is known by you. And for those of you who lived in a cave for the last 30 years, let me start with you, Zeynep, ladies first. Zeynep Tufekci, you are an associate professor at the University of North Carolina, as well as an associate at the Bergman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard, and you write from time to time in the New York Times. Your last article on privacy is brilliant. Tim Berners-Lee, so Tim, well, you are the main reason for us to be seated around you on a Tuesday morning at 8:00 a.m., ahead of a long journey for you. Superlatives are missing when it's about your work. You just invented something that changed the life of billions of people out there. You invented an ecosystem for people to exchange access to information in a way nobody has even thought about it. You have a long list of recognition and awards around the world. I will skip that part. You are the founding director of the World Wide Web Foundation and the director of the W3C, and you're still very active for the future of the internet, the web, sorry, and we will come back on that later. Robert, you are a Belgian engineer. You proposed an hypertext for the CERN documentation in '88. And if you allow me, I would call you the evangelist of the web. You run the whole world to promote that technology. I will ask you why in a few minutes. We have you, Jean-François Groff. Well, if I called Robert after the evangelist, can I call you the developer? You were this young telecom engineer who just helped him develop the www. You have a rich career, but you're mostly an entrepreneur, and you continue to be so in the digital mobile sector. Talking about entrepreneur, you have Lou Montulli. You are a serial entrepreneur. You have invented the Lynx browser. You are a founding engineer at Netscape. But you're also known as the creator of the persistent client state object known as the web cookies. And as I have a sense of humor, I have seated you next to Zeynep, so you have some discussion, you and her, in a few seconds. Let's start. Sir Tim, we are seated here on a Tuesday, 12th of March. Why? What happened so important that we all declare this is the birth of the World Wide Web?
So,
you got the mic, if you.
So the. So I think really the way to date the project was from this memo, and the memo was one, of course, I wrote on a Mac, and in fact I published twice with 1 year in between it roughly. So originally it was, so originally I wrote it and dated it March of 1989, and then and there wasn't really anybody to give it to, because it's the CERN is a place where there are lots of committees you could take a proposal for a physics experiment to, but it wasn't a proposal for a physics experiment, and so not much happened to it. And then I published it again, and published with the two dates, March 1989, May 1990, just to make the point that this isn't the first time you've seen this if you're reading it. But so not a lot happened between there, but really, that was at the point where I got enough energy to actually write it up after discussing it and sort of with coffee with people. But that's when it actually hit paper or hit some desk and got a few copies printed.
So you put this paper on the table. So what is the reaction of your colleagues, of your boss? They sip a champagne, they start dancing and celebrating, and what's happening?
Well, so some of them. The problem was that there was nobody to send it to. I said just send it to people, individuals. There was a committee for building wonderful grand and global hypertext projects at CERN. So, but in fact, what did happen was that Mike Sandel managed to find a way for me to work on it, and it's now famous that when Peggy Rimmer, his wife, went over his things, she found my copy of it. She found his copy of it with written on the corner of it in his handwriting in pencil, vague but exciting on the top of the cover. And so, unfortunately, Mike died. He was diagnosed with cancer about that point, and it was in fact for him that was a very difficult point in his life, and he did manage to get 10 years when he was predicted to only get 5. And so the fact that Mike isn't with us is one of the great sadnesses of the web. And you have to give him huge credit for just finding a way for me finding some time eventually for me to give me an excuse to develop the thing.
That's interesting. So I guess billions of people out there have a better idea of how vague it is now. Huh? But what kept you motivated? What was the big vision behind this?
Well, the big vision was that any piece, whatever computer you were using, if you typed in at a meeting you handed me some piece of paper, you'd probably type that up on a word processor somewhere. So somewhere there was a disk going round and round with that on, and probably that computer was connected to the internet nowadays. So in 1989, that was becoming more acceptable in Europe to do this, use these American internet protocols. And so, if that was the case, then why couldn't you serve it up to the internet so that I could find it over the net? I think the exciting thing about hypertext, because hypertext is just this potentially random web of things, is that if you could produce a hypertext web, then any existing system could be mapped into it. Whether if the system was a matrix, then you couldn't represent that in hypertext. If the system was a tree, you can represent that. So that's partly why hypertext was key. And hypertext was a sort of cool thing at the time, but it was one of these. And computing, it was very fringe. Mm-hmm. You know, there was no comp.sys.hypertext. There was alt. The alt newsgroup was an alternative newsgroup for the weirdos. So the alt.hypertext was where these things were discussed. So it was hypertext and the internet sort of coming together, which seemed to be a relatively simple idea. Mm. But I think once you've seen the possibility of all of these things being part of one big book, then it's just frustrated, and just what can be motivated when you can visualize what it could be like.
Exactly.
And it hasn't happened yet. You just have to keep working on it.
Okay. Which is an transition to you, Robert. I mean, a simple idea, but there were plenty of ideas out there, right? There were Gopher, there were a lot of different ideas. But then you saw something in Tim's work and you said, that's the one. And you became what I call the evangelist. So how comes you saw it suddenly that it would be the one?
Well, let's say that there were indeed a lot of systems out there, and there were quite a lot of much more advanced hypertext systems as well, but they were all confined to a single machine. And so what this did, and I was working on it as well, which is why Mike gave me the copy, and when I read it, I knew that was what was lacking. And so I needed no further convincing. In fact, I then went to see you because we were in offices that were at least a kilometer apart inside CERN. And that's when it started. So it was sort of like, if I make a physics analogy, it was like dropping a crystal in an undercooled liquid, and suddenly, it goes.
I like this.
And that's what happened.
But was there something that you saw, a DNA in this World Wide Web that you thought, yes, this one will scale?
Well, perhaps just the idea that it went over a worldwide network, that the network was sort of secondary to it, but it was everywhere. Okay. It was not proprietary also, which was very important.
I agree. And then we come to you, this young telecom engineer who just come here in the CERN. So how were you attracted to work precisely in that stuff?
Yeah, it was quite being in the right place by accident. I came to CERN thanks to the CERN military service. I was a young French engineer from a telecom school, and France did have a strong tradition of telecom, and especially digital telecom. So when I met Tim at the initiation of Ben Siegel, who had introduced the internet at CERN just a year before, I saw what Tim was programming, and the brilliant thing about this guy is that he could not only express the vision in words, but he could actually code it and make it work. So that's a very, let's say, Californian attitude that Tim had, despite his British heritage. So, and I think that's why he became this celebrated hero today. So anyway, I saw what he was doing, and we talked a lot about the design concepts. It was really fresh. And at one point he said, yeah, but, well, you understand what I'm doing? I said, yeah, of course, it's obvious. It's one of these ideas, once you see it in action, it's so obvious, like everybody can just click, of course. But when we talked, as Robert said, to the experts of hypertext, they thought our system was really junk. We were rejected from international conferences. And the experts who understood the impact of the web said, oh my God, you're going to break the internet. The bandwidth will never follow. And I'm still amazed today that bandwidth has not only followed, but preceded the needs. Like everybody has 4 video streams at home for a really trivial amount of money. And we're busy connecting the other half now. We have about 4 billion people connected. We're going to have the other half connected in the next 2 or 3 years. It's absolutely incredible.
Okay, but I'm glad that you mentioned Tim as a cool Californian inventor, because honestly, I know where I'm talking today. We are in CERN. We could have imagined that such an invention would come from your part of the world, Lou. I mean, in California, next to a garage of Steve Jobs. So why CERN? Was CERN the ecosystem for an invention for the web? Tim, what do you think?
I think there were certain, yeah, looking back, I think there were certain particularly neat things about CERN. The fact that the problem I described, it had in spades. So it had much more heterogeneity. There was no military rule as to that everybody should use the IBM. Actually, you could use the CDC, you could use the Cray. And so there were all these different systems because you were allowed to come from a university using the university, using the computers that you liked in your group at university. So that was partly, it had a very, very dire need for interoperability, for information. At the same time, also, for the early adopters, they had the smartest workstations because they needed to be able to do analysis and display and so on. They were some of the first people to actually have Unix workstations. For a typical physicist would have a Unix workstation on their desk connected to the internet. So in fact, they had the power to be one of the few people who could have been early adopters of, and also had the dire need. So to a certain extent, as a petri dish for the mold of the World Wide Web to grow, this is a pretty good one.
Okay, but just between you and I, were there any resistance in the CERN? Was it spice and sugar everywhere, or there were some resistance?
I must say there was some going around the experiments. Of course, I go to each of the experiments and suggest, hey, you should put other stuff on the web, and there were some. Some people were not convinced, and some were convinced. Paul Kuntz, by the way, was somebody who came over from California, from SNAC, got it immediately. He was worried that it would take too long to operate over the internet. So he logged in using his Next computer. He logged into the Next computer at Slack. It was on his desk. And he did and he loaded a CERN web page from it there. And then he went and he said, wow. It even happened, if I got twice across the Atlantic, it still works as fast as I need to. So he was convinced. And I have to say that, just the one story is that Paul took me back, when I went back to SAC, he took me around a few people that he'd tried to convince about the web. And he took me into the office and just said, you know, I won't say who their names were, but that's the only time I've ever seen anybody sort of rub it in. By the way, you know, it did work in the end. But lots, you have to respect people who decided that it was, who didn't use it because it was a bit random. But also, and also physicists always prefer to write their own code rather than use anybody else's.
Before I switch to you, Lou, I got the non-politically correct question, and that is, if you guys had decided to patent this web, you would own the CERN right now, right? I mean, you would be super rich. What happened for you?
Wouldn't work.
Why?
One of the key reasons the web dominated all the equivalent information systems that were being developed at the time. Well, there were two reasons. One of them, it's a brilliant system. It still works today. We recreated the World Wide Web browser a couple of weeks ago, and it speaks to current servers, and it just works. So that was a brilliant design. Thank you, Tim. But also, that system was made purposely totally open. So CERN already made all their software public. And in addition to the standard CERN license, Robert managed to get CERN, the Director General, Carlo Rubbia at the time, to sign off so that the web technology, the foundational technology, would be public domain, which is the highest shareable thing you can imagine. From a legal standpoint. And without that, industry told us, we had people in suits coming to CERN and talking with Tim and telling him, hey, we love your invention, we want to build plenty of products around this. We had Adobe coming, DEC coming, IBM coming, but what are going to be the usage conditions? Mm-hmm. And it was extremely important that we make it absolutely open. It was also in the early 90s, the movement towards open source was just starting. When we published the web in August 91, Linus Torvalds published the 0.1 version of Linux, also in August 91. Mm. So it was in the air. It would have happened elsewhere as well.
Yeah, so while I was writing code, Robert spent a lot of time lobbying the CERN Directorate, trying to get that piece of paper, which now is on the web with a red stamp on it, and is in 1993. And so then 10 years later, the Web Consortium as a whole made a declaration that they created the WCC patent policy, which made sure that everything that came through the standards body would also be royalty free, after they got caught in a trap by somebody who tried to ambush them and hold the whole technology world to ransom. So the openness was very important, and thanks, Robert, for running that down.
Crossing the Atlantic, Lou, so what did you do on this 12th of March? I mean, what happened to you? You start working on this web, you saw something, tell us about that.
Well, the web as I knew it, I didn't know about it, because I didn't come along and actually discover the genius that it was for almost three or 4 years later. And I'd been working for about a year on my project Lynx, which was networked hypertext, so the idea was in the air. But when I first saw the World Wide Web, and I read your paper, Tim, I recognized that there was just deep thought in what you had done, and you had made it freely available, so that the idea was anyone could adopt the technology. And I made the hard decision to kind of abandon the code that I had written and adopt all the standards that you had created. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, Mosaic kind of came out at a very similar time. And it created an ecosystem of products. And that was, I think, one of the real big secrets here, is the openness and the inclusion. Yes. And the genius of the URL. In the early days of the internet, 99.99% of the content was everywhere else. You had Gopher, you had FTP, and you had a lot of other systems. And the web embraced all that, and it put a really slick user interface on it, and it allowed the average person to just start clicking and getting to that information and not having to worry about 192.168.1 and all of the other minutiae that the internet was at the time. And it became the great enabler. And then as more and more people saw the genius that the web was, and they were only able to see it because more and more products were coming out. And it's because of that openness. If it had been a closed system, if one company was doing it, they couldn't possibly have built all of the technology and the browsers and the many, many things that created the ecosystem that built this juggernaut.
Exactly. That's the power of open source, of open software. And I was amazed at how organically the world of data grew around the web basic principles. Because anybody who had a database of something could easily write a web server that would convert all this on the fly to HTML and just display it over the world, even though we had very slow, by today's standards, very slow lines. I had 2 megabits per second. That was, the fastest in Europe. But it grew so much. And one thing that amazed me is that we didn't expect that so many people would be eager to learn the language, the coding language of the web. Learning HTML, for us, it should never have been seen by ordinary people. This was dirty stuff just for, plumbers like we guys. But people loved to tinker with HTML, and that's why they rejected the nice Visivig editors that Tim and other people had built, because they liked to tinker. And that was really an enlightening experience.
I agree. Well, that DNA openness is also the weakness, I believe, of the web. Zeynep, what are the challenges that you see for this open platform? And you got 3 minutes for this.
Okay, so 3 minutes for... So the challenges come from the same things that make it wonderful. And that's the difficulty. And the openness is wonderful, the connectivity is wonderful. The fact that it was created as a network more for academics who are kind of trusting each other, all of those things made it scale. But at the same time, sort of just to count off all the challenges, it's increasingly centralizing. Because the next couple billion, they're not tinkering, they're on Facebook and they're going through Google. So there's an enormous amount of centralization going on with a few big players becoming gatekeepers. Those few big players have built basically surveillance machines. The cookie helps. But even as useful as it may be, so we're being surveilled in all sorts of ways because of the way the centralization has fused with the financing model, because it's based on surveillance, profiling us, and then targeting for us for ads, which wasn't the original idea at all. I was there in the early days. That wasn't the magic of it wasn't that, but now it's going there. In other ways, the financing model becomes an issue, because a lot of us academics, we don't think of the money side and who's going to pay for the servers, and eventually somebody's going to pay for servers, and eventually somebody's going to make money from that surveillance. So that's been, I think, a big challenge. And that has made our consent less and less useful, because you do anything and you get just swept into all of these things. And it's splintering, right? China is having its kind of internet. And even if you're in the West, Facebook is a kind of internet, and a lot of people, for them, that's the internet. If you're in Indonesia, that's the internet. And finally, because it was a trusted network, it didn't have certain kinds of verification, authentication built into it, which means spoofing, misinformation, fake and real. These are all things that come from the things that also make it wonderful. But we have to think about these things because they're very real.
Thank you, Zeynep. That's a good teaser for the next session. So stay connected. So we will address this at the next session. Staying with you, just one sentence. Yes. What would you tell the next generation about how to use this wonderful tool? One sentence.
So my one sentence to next generation is, if you have something wonderful, if you do not defend it, you will lose it. If you do not defend the magic and the things that make it wonderful, it's just not going to stay magical by itself.
Thank you. Lou?
working on the web. Working on the web gave me something to believe in, something to be part of that was bigger than myself. And I would say to everyone out there looking for something, engage in something bigger than yourself, believe in something, and you can change the world.
Thank you. Jean-François?
We didn't think we would change the world in a social way, but we did believe this would get big. It went even bigger than we imagined, and I'm forever grateful for having been here by chance at the right time.
Yes. Thank you. Robert?
Well, get off it and save the planet.
I'm so surprised.
Save the planet. We have only one important thing to do, that is to save our planet. That's the biggest problem that we have to deal with, and the web can help that. And I was very confident that it would be a good tool to do so and to bring people together. And in a sense, it is, of course, but we're not doing enough for this paramount problem that we're seeing, and that I think is much more important than anything, including this whole session.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you. Tim, the last word for you.
So yes, climate change is important, and a lot of the things we have, big massive challenges like finding cures for cancer and understanding Alzheimer's and so on. And these challenges, we should be able to use the web for. We should, the idea was that it should be a big collaborative medium, which will allow us to do science, do peer review, go through processes like Wikipedia processes, which end up producing not perfection, but things which are really, really amazingly good. Things like the product of the record of scientific knowledge and so on. I think people feel that we used to have the press as producing a pretty good, reliable record of what's been going on out there, but now on the web, it's people are worried about it not being reliable. So what I say, what I would suggest you should realize that humanity needs to figure out what to believe and then figure out what to do. For figuring out what to believe, we have science, really important facts, and we have things like Wikipedia on the web. For figuring out what to do, we have democracy. As Winston Churchill said, it sucks, but it's the West, we haven't got anything better than democracy. So we have got systems on the web which harness people together to search for truth and facts. We don't have such good systems out there yet that harness people together in the search for good decisions, for where can you go to have a good, open, accountable political debate where you will end up leaving a trail of breadcrumbs of facts and argued, logical, respectful decisions. So build systems for us to use for our political systems, for our communal decision-making, and add those to the systems and improve the systems that we have for our communal fact-making. So science is not just science, but also democracy. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. It was more... Thank you. It was more than one sentence, but you'll be forgiven for today, exceptionally. Gentlemen and ladies, please help me clapping this wonderful panel. So, without transition, because we're a little bit late, I apologize. For a week in February, a group of developers came to CERN, and they have something interesting to share. So I guess we have a video now. Thank you.